Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw Yeah. We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On to banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss the Mark Waid event, The Kingdom, as well as the Return to Kingdom Come storyline from World's Finest, is returning guest, sweet Bernie Gerstmayr. Welcome back.
Hey, good evening, man. I'm still kind of giggling internally about what happened before you press record.
Yeah, so this is our big Return to Kingdom Come episode, and moments before I pressed record, you asked me.
I said, hey, did you record a Kingdom Come podcast with somebody else before this? And you said,
I sure did. With you. With you. You were my guest. This is going back. I'd have to check my chart or double check my math, but a year, 2 years ago. I mean, it's been quite a while now, but I had you on and we discussed the original Kingdom Come miniseries. And then I did an episode right after that with Rich Roney. We talked about Thy Kingdom Come, which was Alex Ross's continuation in the Justice Society of America title during the post-Infinite Crisis era. So we have covered the original Kingdom Come miniseries, and it was you and I, it was with you.
That's hilarious. That's also so sad because it tells me how much I talk about stuff with people. So it's like, I wonder, wait, I've had this Kingdom Come conversation with many people, but now I actually recently looked at my phone because I was looking at our podcast schedule for tonight, man. And then I pressed search for podcasts and I was able to scroll through all the past dates of us doing stuff. It was actually pretty cool. It was fun.
That's awesome. So yeah, so we are here once again, but It feels like the first time talking about the world of Kingdom Come and specifically that event, The Kingdom, which just celebrated its 25th anniversary, which makes me feel incredibly old. And DC, I think somewhat surprisingly, put out a beautiful deluxe edition 25th anniversary hardcover, which came out very recently. I know you and I each have a copy. And then very recently in the current ongoing World's Finest title by Mark Waid and Dan Mora, we had the 5-part Return to Kingdom Come storyline, which of course picked up threads from Kingdom Come, but even more specifically and more recently from the Strange Visitor, aka Boy Thunder arc from earlier in the World's Finest title, which you may or may not remember, you and I also talked about.
Okay, that I did remember. Okay, I'm not getting that old. Now I do know what we have talked about.
That was more recent. That was fairly recently. You and I did an episode on the first year's worth of issues of the Waid Mora World's Finest title. Yeah. And when I was originally mapping out this episode, it was essentially going to be, okay, year 2 of World's Finest. And no disrespect to Metamorpho, but I was looking at that elementary arc, and the audience knows I've never had much affinity for Metamorpho. If anything is ever going to change that, it may very well be Anthony Carrigan playing him in the new Superman movie, because I love him. So
agreed, man. Him on Barry is, it's wonderful.
Absolutely incredible on Barry. So that might change.
It's funny because you said that, because today, literally at the shop, Joe had 2 copies of the hardcover Metamorpho World's Finest arc. He goes, hey, did you order one of these? I went, nah. And he was like, oh, did you not like them? Like, I just can't. I don't know why. So I read it, but I don't need to own it. We're good.
So between the Metamorpho of it all, the release of the 25th anniversary edition of The Kingdom, and just kind of having Kingdom Come on the brain, I was like, well, we might get a little more pop and have more to sink our teeth into if we make this a Return to Kingdom Come episode. And so I think that will serve us well. Speaking of your past episodes, I want to thank you again. You were here just a few weeks ago to discuss the Man of Steel movie. And I will tell you, as of this recording, it is currently our most downloaded episode of 2024 so far.
Whoa, that's cool.
So thank you again.
That's awesome, man. I got a lot of cool feedback from people I know and people reaching out saying like, hey, kind of similar to what you saw. It's like, I don't fully agree, but I really enjoyed that episode. Like, you guys are super passionate about it. And yeah, it's fun to talk about this stuff, man. And it actually makes people think about it. So it's cool.
Yeah, I had so much fun with you and Justin and Ed, and the feedback was great. And one of my favorite responses was on Twitter, I think, where someone was like, I shook my head the whole way through as I was listening, but I enjoyed it. And I was like, hey, you still listen, right? Like that says a lot, and it means a lot. So anyway, it's great to have you back here to talk more Kingdom Come. I actually, though it wasn't homework and we've already talked about it, I did reread the original Kingdom Come miniseries.
Oh, wow. Cool.
I got to tell you, this is one of those things that my appreciation for it and enjoyment of it grow as the years go by. Each time I go back to it. And I realize more and more, like, reading it as a kid, I don't know, I was 10. Again, it definitely made an impression on me, like we talked about in that episode. But I know I didn't get everything out of it that I could have and that I have in the subsequent readings. And so, again, not to rehash the episode that we did, but I really enjoyed it. And it's climbing in the ranks of my favorite Superman stories each time I revisit it.
Yeah, I think there's something to do with the age of the book and the age of the reader. I think as we get older and we get more in depth into the universe of who Superman is in the DC universe, and like, you think about how much you've dug in over the last few years, even to other characters as well. I think because of that, such a universe spanning book, it does add, if your appreciation already is higher from those characters.
That is very true. I'll also say, maybe as far as just new takeaways, it's a lot simpler than I think it appears. And I don't say that in a negative way at all. I think the themes and the character dynamics are very rich and there's a lot going on there. But just in terms of the plot, the mechanics of the story, it is relatively simple. And then again, that allows you to dive into what's motivating all of the characters and these differences in the philosophies that they adopt and employ. Superman's whole arc from inaction, right, abandoning his post and his role in the world, to ultimately coming back, but maybe not coming back in the right way, trying to impose his sense of morality and dictate from above, imprisoning all the metahumans who didn't go along with this. And then ultimately coming to the conclusion that it's not by stepping away or standing above, but rather by working with and among humanity. That's the path forward. And of course, the friction that we see with him and Wonder Woman and with him and Batman. It's just, again, I know I'm preaching to the choir and I'm not saying anything that hasn't already been said about this work, but just, again, more and more, I get more out of it. And then the other two things real quick, I think one of the things that I never quite loved about it was just, and this probably will sound crazy, but how many characters are on the canvas here, especially because so many of them were new characters or twists on old characters, characters who might not instantly be recognizable. Mm-hmm. But upon this reread in particular, I'm like, oh no, I see why it is that way. And it really gives you a sense of the scope of this story. And if you're really talking about an entire generation of metahumans running rampant and being reckless and careless with their powers, this, I think, goes a long way to showing you just kind of the volume that you're dealing with. And so it provides this very populated canvas, but then still the focus of the story is on our core, as it should be. So I think it really works. But I think that's one of those things where there was always something about it that I didn't quite love, but now I'm on board.
There's something about, and we're going to talk about this as we get to the end of the Mark Waid World's Finest run that we're doing. There's some really cool closure that I think we needed also, going from Kingdom Come to Kingdom to this. That's what I'm kind of excited to talk about, because I needed a little more closure after the Kingdom.
Yep, I can definitely appreciate the desire for that. Yeah. Oh, and then the last thing, and this actually will launch us right into what we're going to be talking about. But I always need to be reminded when I reread this how little Magog is actually in Kingdom Come. Right? I think in my head, he looms so large, and of course he is such a pivotal figure in it. He is really the representative of that generation of metahumans. And yes, he is the one who kills the Joker and, of course, precipitates Superman withdrawing from humanity. And, of course, he leads the group of metahumans against Parasite and refuses to accept Parasite's surrender, which leads to Parasite lashing out and breaching Captain Atom, leading to the nuclear devastation of Kansas and the breadbasket. So he has a number of key things to do in the book, but he doesn't have a ton of page time overall, but such a pivotal figure. But I think it lends itself very well to these stories that we're going to talk about, specifically the world's finest ones, because there's a lot to fill in there, and Waid does that.
And it's funny because Magog is actually, I've always found him so interesting as a character when I read Kingdom Come. And in the rereads, like you're saying, I didn't realize how little he's a part of the story. It is still a Superman story, but there's, like you said, there's such a vast amount of characters. He gets almost lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost a mind trick of this story where you feel like you're getting so much more Magog than you actually are. I also am really going to do my best. This will be a little bit of a test to keep all of my Magogs and Gogs of the DC universe straight, because there's a lot floating around in the stories that we read. Plus, and I know we're not delving into this, but when you get into the Thy Kingdom Come business, there's a lot. And we won't even talk about the Chuck Austin Action Comics run.
No, please don't. All of this has made me want to reread. I have the trades for the JSA 3-parter, and I haven't really read it in such a long time. So will I be pleasantly surprised? Like, will I enjoy it, you think?
I think that reading it together will help. It's a pretty sprawling story in terms of how many issues it runs. It's collected in 3 individual hardcovers / soft covers.
Yeah.
And I think at the time, reading it monthly, you kind of felt it wearing a little bit, but I think reading it together would help. I think that was largely my experience when I revisited it for that episode I did with Rich.
Oh, okay.
I actually think you'll find it interesting. And for the audience as well, I would encourage you to read or reread that Thy Kingdom Come story, because it's essentially the flip of what we're reading in World's Finest, where in this World's Finest arc, you have our Superman and Batman going to Earth 22. Whereas in Thy Kingdom Come, you have the Earth 22 Superman literally plucked from the moment before that nuclear bomb drops on all of the metahumans in battle, plucked from that moment and taken to our Earth. And then he sees events start to unfold on our Earth that seem to be leading us into the Kingdom Come world. And you see his reaction to all of that. So I think it actually would pair kind of nicely with what we just read. And you kind of get to see, the other side of it.
That's good to know. All right, cool. Because I'll dig into that then.
I have a question from one of our patrons, Rick, and this will tee us up here. Rick says, what are your feelings about going back to the Kingdom Come universe? Up until now, I've been against it, but with the World's Finest story, I've actually enjoyed it. So that's just kind of as a big picture question, right? Kingdom Come stands as truly one of these all-time DC Comics classics. I don't think you can find any list of top 10 DC stories that doesn't have Kingdom Come on it. So just the idea of reopening that world, how do you feel about that?
Oh, I was super excited. Like, again, because it wasn't somebody else doing it. It's Mark Waid doing it. So if there's anybody that's going to reopen that can, it should be, and it's going to be him. And again, I'm always surprised at how I guess he surprises me, to be honest, how creative he can be, and how there could still be a twist, but still touch on what made Kingdom Come special and what makes that idea of the arc very special, or hard actually too. But again, what I said earlier, the closure that I felt made me much happier that we jumped back into this universe.
Yeah, very
But it's
much
sad.
so.
It's a sad ending. It's a sad story.
It is. And so certainly The Kingdom has been out for 2.5 decades. So hopefully people have read it by this point. World's Finest, spoiler warning for both stories, and especially World's Finest, which I know is recent, but hopefully people have read it. I highly recommend it in case you haven't. It's really a lot of fun. And I guess my feeling is, more than anything, I'm kind of flabbergasted that DC hasn't done more in the years since. Now, I'm not saying they necessarily should, but just from a kind of cynical corporate perspective, this was so popular, whether they did it with or without Mark Waid and or Alex Ross, like you would have expected to see, right? Just more from this. And I don't know now, to my knowledge, I'm not aware of any deal that Waid and or Ross might have with DC, formal or informal, about them being the only ones who can do this. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Certainly we haven't seen anything not from one of them. So I don't know. It could just kind of be a courtesy from DC, or maybe there is some sort of agreement, spoken or unspoken. I mean, I don't know.
I would almost, I don't know, if you were a comic writer, would you want to touch that holy grail with a 10-foot pole? Like, man, like there's certain things in every universe of whether it's movies, musicals, you name it. There's always like that film that like no one is going to want to remake or touch unless they are that golden director or person or writer. So
it'd be like doing a sequel to Watchmen. But I'm a fan of Doomsday Clock. I still have never read the before Watchmen piece, so I really can't speak to that. Yeah. But no, I know, to your point. Yeah, there are certain things that it takes a lot, right, for someone to step into that. So, and the other thing too is I kind of wonder, and this leads me to my next question for you. I wonder if the response to The Kingdom maybe kind of quelled interest in further exploration. I don't know. So let me ask you that. So The Kingdom, what was your experience with it at the time, as far as you remember?
I know for a fact that I did not enjoy it. I was happy at first because there was more content, but then reading it was, I don't want to say it was confusing, but it felt a little disjunct at times. And then we add in the Hypertime idea, which we'll talk about. I mean, that left a weird taste. Now, keep in mind, I'm almost positive, but that Kingdom trade existed, and then it was out of print for a long, long time. And that kind of tells you, I mean, they could not stop printing Kingdom Come. That has become so many reissues and printings and essentials and all that kind of stuff. Kingdom you couldn't find anywhere. I had to find a copy online first, and then of course, like when I got the trade, they re-released the hardcover. So, but I did not enjoy it as much as the other one.
Yeah, and so the setup for this, for anyone who's really like, what the hell is this Kingdom you guys are talking about? So, again, this was 99, and you had a 2-part miniseries that was essentially, those were the 2 bookend issues. And then in the middle, you had a handful of one-shots that all tied together. And then there was also the New Year's Evil Gog issue that really set up the Gog character, who is the primary antagonist of the Kingdom. But so essentially, there's this poor soul, William, who was the survivor of the initial devastation of Kansas. And Superman, when he returned to action after learning of the devastation of Kansas, found him wandering, the sole survivor of this destruction. Now, of course, we did not see that rescue in the original Kingdom Come. So this was an added piece of history that we got. And this boy grows up to literally worship Superman and view him as a god. And he becomes this minister and sets up this whole church. And Superman has a conversation with him, sort of disabusing him of the notions that he has. And I want to circle back to that because it's really interesting. But there's also something that's like darkly funny. We got to talk about it. Yeah. And then this poor soul again becomes the puppet essentially of the Quintessence. They imbue him with a portion of their power. They want to accelerate the devastation of Kansas, each for their own end. And William, now Gog, goes along with this and is going back in time day by day, killing Superman over and over again. And eventually goes back to the moment where the Kingdom Come Superman and Wonder Woman are welcoming their child into the world, and he kidnaps the newborn and goes back to our time to initiate the destruction of Kansas in the then present day DCU. And Gog's essential motivation with that is he feels Superman escaped blame for the destruction of Kansas in Kingdom Come because he wasn't there. So he wants to make sure this happens on Superman's watch so that he will be blamed for it and will be seen as the Antichrist that William/Gog believes him to be. So this story brings the Kingdom Come trinity of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman into contact with their present day DCU counterparts. And then you have in the middle these one-shots where you see some of those Kingdom Come generation characters, the children of the heroes that we know, and you see them kind of dealing with the notion that kind of it doesn't matter what happens at this point. The fact that Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman have gone back in time, the world that they know will cease to exist. And you see how each of them grapple with that. And then, yes, in the conclusion, we get the reveal of Hypertime, this vast interconnected web of parallel timelines and realities.
The old 52.
You know, I'm going to jump ahead for a second. We get to, I love that World's Finest arc, but I'm reading it and all of a sudden I see that goddamn 52 multiverse map. I can't escape this thing.
I know. I can't stand that damn thing. Again, that's one of the reasons that I didn't like it originally. And when I reread it, I was like, oh gosh, this is another damn reason why I hate the new 52.
I think Anthony needs like a trigger warning on these books now. I need a little something that is like, there will be a map of the multiverse and it's like still scarred from all those Red Skies crisis events. But that's in World's Finest. But so it sounds like you're not a huge Hypertime fan then.
You know, I wish they would have just called it the multiverse or something. I don't know why. And I've never been a huge fan of the linear men. I get it. I think it's just a lot.
Oh, I love the linear men.
God. I do like Wave Rider, but like the Matt Rider and Rip Hunter and all that stuff. It's not confusing. It's just a lot and kind of unnecessary.
The thing, I have a soft spot for them because they were there in that Death of Superman era, and there was that Legacy of Superman special where Wave Rider freezes time.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. I know exactly.
So that imprinted on me, but I get your point. And also it's like when we really think about it, the linear men, like they kind of suck. Like they don't even know. They don't even know
all the time.
Only one of them knows about Hypertime. It's like, guys, like this is your whole thing.
You are not linear. You don't know anything. You're just people. I don't know, man. So I honestly think, and again, Mark Waid, if I poop on this, and if you listen to this, please don't hate me because I love so much what you do. That New Year's Evil Gog issue is awesome, but it just takes a turn in the kingdom that it didn't feel like the progression that I was hoping for.
I hear you. I mean, I think, as memory serves, I read this as it was coming out as a kid. And then I did have that original trade at some point, and over the years divested myself of both. And then in the years since I've been doing the podcast, I have reread that 2-issue miniseries for various Kingdom related episodes for background. And we've touched on it, but this is the first time that I reread the entire event, one shots included. And I gotta say, and Mark, if you're listening, and I'm not saying this, I'm not to score points, but this, I really enjoyed. Like, this is the most I've ever enjoyed that event. And I think just kind of coming back to it, especially, I don't know, maybe just seeing it kind of in the larger context of Kingdom Come, Thy Kingdom Come, the World's Finest business. And like I said, also having those little character studies in between in the form of those one shots. And I know you didn't get a chance to reread those specifically, but the Offspring one with the Son of Plastic Man, I don't know to what extent you remember that.
Not as much. I mean, I remember liking the character. I remember being interested by him.
And that one was drawn by Frank Quitely.
Oh, right. Yeah. And I saw that. Yep.
But that one hit me in the feels, or whatever the phrase is, because it really taps into that father-son dynamic between Eel O'Brien, Plastic Man, and his son, who's essentially been following in his father's footsteps and is a bit of a clown. And his girlfriend is kind of pushing him to take things more seriously, essentially, and get out from under his father's shadow. And this larger point of tension between them that Plastic Man is kind of always there. And there's a pretty humorous montage where you see over the years, since Offspring's been a little kid, that Plastic Man is kind of just always there in disguise and then reveals himself, whether he's the bounce house at the kid's birthday party or literally is there as like a lamp during a date that his son's having. He's like, great job, son. So clearly overstepping some bounds. But there's this runner where every time Plastic Man kind of reveals himself and then leaves, he's like, all right, I'll leave you alone. I'll leave you alone. But of course he never does. And then at one point in the story, Plastic Man, and this really is crossing a line, but disguises himself as his son and speaks with the girlfriend and basically like, why don't you like my dad? And she has this whole thing where like, what has he ever given you? Right? Like essentially he's just taught you to be a joke, a clown. But you get to the end of the story and Offspring is with his fellow superhero comrades. And again, they're all anticipating being wiped out of existence, literally, with the timeline about to change. And he's trying to track down some of their villain antagonists, right? And try to, he wants to be a hero once before everything ends. He wants to be able to get the bad guy. But the rest of them are like, no, like we just like, this is it. This is the end. And he's like, well, why do you even want me here then? And they're like, well, because you're the one who makes us laugh. Like the one thing his dad gave him was the one thing that actually mattered for those people in the end, or what would have been the end. And as always, Plastic Man shows up because he always has to be there. And I think what the girlfriend said is, kind of resonated with him, and he's apologetic. And he's like, I never left you alone. And Offspring's like, no, you didn't. And then you turn the page, splash page, huge embrace. And he's like, and thank you for that. You never left me alone. You're always there. So of course, and the audience should not be surprised. I'm reading this like, oh, this is so great. So that one really resonated. I thought that was a really, really heartfelt story.
I'll go back and reread that then. Okay. I was on a crunch for time, so I didn't. So I'll go back and read it again. That's cool.
Yeah, that one I thought was particularly good. With the hardcover, or this one in particular, did you take the dust jacket off or did you leave it on?
I left it on. Why? What's underneath it?
Well, what's underneath it? Hypertime. The design for this was amazing. So that double page spread from the Kingdom #2, when Rip Hunter shows them Hypertime, that's what's under the dust jacket, the front and back. It's gorgeous.
Oh, great. Did you throw the book across the room when you saw that?
No, this is the thing. I love Hypertime. No, I love Hypertime. This is why I'm so happy for Mark Waid in this current era for him at DC, where he's telling his spiritual sequel to Birthright in the form of The Last Days of Lex Luthor. He's got World's Finest in that whole corner of the DCU. Because I look at this, we've talked about Birthright and, a frustration that I felt. I enjoy Secret Origin, but it was just like, we just got a really great Superman origin. Like it never really seemed like it was given time to take hold. So I was always kind of bummed about that. And then with Hypertime, it's like, here he gave DC like a very elegant solution that allows for every story that they've published to quote unquote count. And has provided a way to open up story potential. You can have these crossovers and whatnot. And audience, correct me if I'm wrong, but with the exception of the hypertension arc from Superboy and Waid's own dark Flash Walter West story in the Flash title, I don't know that we ever got much of anything else in terms of Hypertime.
Didn't we get the DC 1 million stuff? Wasn't that also? I think that was also involved with Hypertime. I think that's where I thought that's where the other Hour Man came from. And they could correct, audience, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I thought they referred to it, I thought, in that point.
I wouldn't be surprised if they refer to it, but to my knowledge, and I revisited that not that long ago, I don't think it really has much to do with it, but
I agree with you. I think that was a very easy out. Like, hey, everybody loved Elseworlds. Go. Like, just, they could have done so much. They still could have kept the continuity going on the regular books, but we could have had so much more. But you know what they decided to do is wait till 2011 and do the new 52.
I know. Well, and it's funny because now Hypertime has had a bit of a resurgence, and now, of course, it's part of the divine continuum. I won't go into this whole thing again, but at least it's been referenced and is part of the DC world again. But when you mention 1 million, I wouldn't be surprised if it's at least talked about in that, because Waid writes the introduction to the hardcover, and I thought this was very interesting. With Hypertime in particular, he talks about being in a cab with Grant Morrison on the way to their editor, Dan Raspler's house. And all of a sudden he blurted out this idea of Hypertime. And Morrison was like, yeah, everything that's ever been published happened. And then started drawing it on the back of a napkin. So
I love it.
Yeah. So just kind of that. I love the kind of the backstory to how that came to be. Part of me, here's the thing. I don't know why Hypertime didn't really take hold. And I would really only be speculating. But I think part of the problem is it's too good of a fix. So in that introduction, Waid talks about how, he and Morrison were talking about this idea that events like Crisis and Zero Hour, and he wasn't knocking them or anything, but that they could be a bit reductive or restrictive, right? Like, streamlining continuity and killing off characters. And they wanted to create a path where, again, everything has happened and you can go anywhere. And I was thinking, like, right before we sat down to record, I was like, yeah, you know what? I think the problem is, it's like, then why would you need to have these crisis events?
Right. You wouldn't. I mean, if you think about it, it wasn't far off that. And what year was this? Was it? 99,
the Kingdom was 99. Yeah.
Okay. So it was really only 6 years or so till Infinite Crisis.
Yeah.
And then Infinite Crisis birthed 52. And Countdown to Final Crisis, and then all that up, and then we were back. We had 52 universes.
And it's like you always hear about pharmaceutical companies and diseases where it's like it's more beneficial for them, right, to just continue treating the symptoms as opposed to curing the. And I was thinking of like, that's like DC. It's like, if you have this as a very easy solution, why do you need to have Infinite Crisis and all the metal events and all this other business?
Yeah. Well, and like World's Finest, that book's not a continuity book. Like they could have been doing this for a while, and they did to a certain extent, just not as well. And that's the thing, dude. Can we just also address quickly Dan Mora's artwork? I would like him to draw all the things all the time for me.
He is incredible, and that's the other big piece I think about the Kingdom.
Agreed. I do not like Olivetti's work on it.
So he does the first one, and then Mike Zeck draws number 2.
Yeah.
And then we have different artists for every one shot in between. Jerry Ordway does the New Year's Evil Gog.
Yes. And I love that one.
But here's the thing, and I say this diplomatically, but look, you guys know, I mean, as many complaints and critiques and nitpicks as I might have, they're usually pointed towards the writing side.
Right.
I think in large part because I can't draw to save my life. And I'm not saying, I can write a story like any of these guys. I'm not saying that. But if push came to shove and I had to do something on a comic, would it be drawing it? So I'm usually really impressed with what people come up with. And look, it's subjective and you like certain styles more than others. But I think that what was particularly problematic here was that you were coming off of Kingdom Come.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
With some of the most gorgeous.
I didn't think of that.
like the most gorgeous art you've seen, and so distinct and so striking. And look, it's a visual medium. The art is always vitally important, but especially in something like that. I mean, that was on another level. And so, and I don't think it was until I saw Dan Mora's art and I read that arc where I was like, oh yeah, that's the problem. Because when you look at what Mora does, it is not Alex Ross. It's his own style, but it's still striking and gorgeous and cohesive in its own way. So he's able to kind of do his own thing, but it still works. But here, I don't know if it was just the choice of artists or the fact that there were so many or what, but I think the visual side of this is where this one didn't measure up.
No, and again, I'm not. Please don't hear me pooping on. I'm with you. I'm not pooping on the artists. But again, it's such a contrast. And I would challenge you to take the Dan Mora stuff and then Olivetti's and Zeck's. It's not just their art. I can't remember, but it's the coloring. I don't know. that does affect much more than people realize. That it affects the tone of the book, and the World's Finest just pops so well because of the colorist also.
Dude, now I'll really get nitpicky. I didn't like the lettering in the Kingdom.
Agreed.
There was something. Yes. No, there was something. There's an elegance to Kingdom Come, yes. and it manifests in various ways. And I think here, between the art, the lettering, I wish I had a better description of it, but it just, I don't know, just rougher. I don't have a better.
Well, and sometimes it came off like, oh gosh, what's that characters? Oh, like Etrigan, and how it's very like rigid. It reminded me of that, and it just didn't feel like it matched well. So I don't know, man. And again, I know we're being really finicky about certain things, but it affects your read. Like, I do struggle because, again, I'm not an artist, but my biggest struggle is if I don't like the art of the book, even if the story's great, I have a hard time going through that arc. It doesn't feel like a Superman book if the art feels off. No. And even with one-shots, I struggle with that kind of stuff too.
No, I agree. And I think, again, all of these things, I think, were working against it. I think if you had maybe one artist for all of this, or a different stable of artists, maybe it could overcome the lettering. Or if you had gorgeous lettering, maybe it would have made up for a little. I mean, little things, but they do all have an effect when taken together. So again, I think just visually, this was a letdown.
I think in the intro of this hardcover, it does talk about how Mark talked to Alex. And Alex didn't want to do it. Like, he's like, no, like, we're done. Like, I don't want to be part. So that had to be hard, because I bet once Mark talked it through and he's like, let's do something different. Let's do a continuity, or a continuation rather. I mean, I'm sure there was concern. And if Mark really wanted to put the project through, but DC says, well, where's Alex? But he's like, he doesn't want to do it. I'm sure that was hard too.
The background was interesting. I don't know if he's talked about this in other interviews, but that introduction to the hardcover I thought really was fascinating, where he kind of lays out how, unsurprisingly, DC wanted a follow-up after the massive success of Kingdom Come. But it was clear from the jump that Alex was not going to have the time to draw something. So then DC's idea was for them to collaborate. I'm assuming Alex Ross would have been the co-plotter or co-writer on a monthly book that would have bridged the then current DCU with that Kingdom Come timeline. But that's where he said that they had creative differences. And it wasn't, he said they, split amicably on it, but they wanted to go in different directions, where Alex really wanted to lean into the fourth world Jack Kirby stuff, and Waid wanted more kind of, down to earth, character driven pieces, which then it's so ironic, because you get to the end of the World's Finest arc and Darkseid, like, this is amazing.
It's a fourth world story.
I know.
And the analyfe equation and all of it, that was a really cool connection piece.
Yeah,
we're gonna talk about that too.
So and again, all to say, not just because Waid didn't want to lean so heavily into it. Clearly, he has affinity for that. But that seemed to be what they saw, that what would have been that monthly project connecting the current DCU with Kingdom Come. They parted ways and that fell apart. And then Waid talks about how he ultimately repurposed that into what we're seeing now in World's Finest. And then I guess in place of all of that came this The Kingdom event.
Right.
I alluded to this before, but the New Year's Evil GOG special, I just wanted the scene where Clark goes to Pastor William.
Yeah.
And is like, look, like, this wasn't my will. This wasn't a test of faith. This didn't happen because I wanted it to. It happened because I stepped away. It's my fault. Go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead. Why did you find that kind of funny? Because I felt at first was really sad, because he owns it. Like, no, this was my fault. You should not be worshiping me. This was a mistake.
Yeah, and he says, I didn't save you because you were special. You were just lucky. Everyone's special. Yeah. And he is Clark's apologetic. The thing that struck me was, and I'm not even saying this really as a critique. Obviously, this has to have, the story needs to unfold. William needs to become GOG. But it's just like, Clark, maybe before you leave, like, why don't you just take a beat? Because you just upended this guy's entire life and worldview. And he's standing there in stunned silence, and you're just like, bye.
Yeah, he just dips. Like, with not much follow-up. like Not. I wonder what happened. I wonder how William's doing. There wasn't anything.
I mean, I love the idea that he clocks what William is doing and he decides to intervene. And so just for the audience, the kingdom, right? This picks up obviously after the events of Kingdom Come. So this is now where he is back living among people, right? And trying to help as part of humanity. So the idea that he clocks this and he goes to talk to William and he tries to set him straight.
Yeah.
Great. And I think most of what he says is what he should say. And he's apologetic and all of that. But it's just, it's like, I don't know. Again, maybe just take a beat. Maybe wait for him to say something else before you leave. Maybe say, hey,
are you okay?
We can set you up with a counselor from the Wayne Foundation. Like
something. Yeah.
He just leaves this guy twisting in the wind.
He dips and he's out and he's already working on some other project. Like he's already out there. You remember he's like, I think he's helping and building a construction thing or something. And then William Magog shows up, right? Gog? No, Gog. See, we're going to do this. This is the first time.
Kingdom. All right, I think I have this, and I only drank coffee before the recording. No bourbon. I should be sharp, and hopefully I have all this. But and these are of course, and you would know better than me, the biblical figures, right? Gog and Magog.
They're connected. It's in Ezekiel. Yeah.
But so Magog is the character in Kingdom Come. He's the one who again kills the Joker, leads to the destruction of Kansas, but then ultimately is repentant.
He's David. Yeah.
So he's ultimately repentant in that story. And again, doesn't have as much page time as we always think that he did.
Right.
Then this New Year's Evil Gog special turns Pastor William, the little boy who survived the initial destruction of Kansas and grew up to worship Superman and then had his whole worldview shattered.
Yep.
He becomes infused with the power of the quintessence and becomes Gog.
Gog. Okay, good. Just Gog.
And so Gog, is the villain of the piece for the kingdom. We will get a different Gog and Magog in Thy Kingdom Come, but that's its own story. And then
a different Gog in the Chuck Austin story.
Yes. And then even in the World's Finest, we get a different Gog who leads to
like the
Magog
original Gog.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much Gog. Yeah.
I love drawing inspiration from the Bible and obviously the book of Revelation. We have all those quotes throughout Kingdom Come. It's totally appropriate. But it's just like, we have picked different names that were easier to tell apart.
Yeah. And just don't throw a ma. Is there a pa? Is there a pagog?
Magog.
Magog. Eggnog.
We're laughing now, but you'll see.
Just wait, everybody.
Listen, that new 52 map is going to come back out, and we're going to go to some world, and Magog.
And it's all Gogs. That's their last name.
But but he becomes Gog, and then he goes back in time. And what no one can piece together initially in the kingdom is all of these supermen that Gog kills as he's going back in time. They're all showing up in the afterlife. Which,
that's all weird too.
So like time ramifications aside, each person only has one soul. So it's like, how is this possible? But that's why we get the revelation about hypertime at the end. So it's like,
correct.
And they don't spell this out explicitly, but
they do not.
But essentially the idea is that when Gog is traveling back in time, he's not staying on the same timeline. He's like bouncing around hypertime. And that's why
he's just killing killing any Superman he can find. The creepiest one to me was when I think it's the most recent Superman gets killed. And there's the first. Now, what you didn't say was too, when William becomes Gog, and like in the 30 seconds that Clark ruined his life, he then goes to find Clark, offs him hardcore. Like he's working on a bridge. He roasts him on this bridge, like carves the Superman symbol over it, and then he dips. But like he didn't just like kill Superman, he like barbecued him hardcore. And that's what's freaky in that afterlife scene where the guy, he's just in the cape and even says like, you don't want to see what's under the cape. It didn't go well. And so then he just has like the X-ray vision kind of comes out of under the cloak. And I'm like, that's creepy, man. That's the actual only time that I thought Olivetti's artwork really made sense. I was like, oh, that's good right there. That was awesome.
Yeah, that was off-putting. The one that got me was when Gog recreates the destruction of Krypton.
Oh, dude. Oh, and then he's a frozen Superman made of kryptonite floating in space.
Yeah, that was rough. I was like, oh man,
he's
that's
screaming,
harsh.
Yeah, it's like you won't be dead yet. You'll be floating, screaming. And I was like, what is happening? Yeah, it was pretty awesome, but rough.
I don't mean to harp on the scene with William, but the last thing I'll say is, what do you think, as Clark was leaving the temple, church, whatever it was, as he was walking away after that conversation, do you think he thought to himself, nailed it? Like, this guy's going to be fine.
Oh, God, that's the thing. Like, I don't know how you could have just said that. That bothered me because it's like you just ruined and we're not talking about like, I don't know. We didn't just tell the kid like, hey, by the way, you were adopted. It's not like that kind of revelation. It's your faith, everything you've built since you were a child is not true. Like it's a long time. And to just go, okay, bye. And then go back to working on the bridge. I don't know how Clark would have thought that was going to end well.
Acme Comics is a locally owned and operated comic book store in Greensboro, North Carolina, for people of all ages and walks of life. With more than 40 years and a new second location to its name, Acme is a multiple-time Eisner Award nominee. The shop features a significant contemporary and vintage selection, as the Acme team uses their collective knowledge and resources to connect you with the best material. Mail order subscriptions to new releases are available, and all offerings are available anywhere via mail order. Follow Acme on social media and eBay, listen to the Acme Cast on all podcast services, and visit acmecomics.com for much more. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of two of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network.
We got to get into this too, but like the quintessence.
I was going to ask.
Shame on those a-holes. like, I wanted to go Justin DeVoe all over that when I read that. I was like, who the fuck are these guys? Like, what? How dare you, sir?
Oh, he'll love that. I mean, well, what I wanted to ask you is, obviously what they do is horrendous to this poor guy.
It is terrible. Yeah.
Do you buy so the one who approaches William and imbues him with this power appears at the outset of the story to be the Phantom Stranger, but we find out in the climax of this, it's actually Hyperman, the child of Superman and Wonder Woman, all grown up.
Yes.
So it's not Phantom Stranger.
Which also is bananas, but we'll continue.
But I guess, so when he initially reaches out, he's not aware at the beginning of what the quintessence is really after, what their true agenda is. He just thinks that, I guess, they want to quote unquote fix things, like prevent all of it.
But they place that thought in him. When they give him the power, said, you can go back and you can, and it's like, he's already pissy. So it's not going to take much of a shove to make him go bananas on this.
But do you buy then? So when quote unquote Phantom Stranger, aka Hyperman, like realizes, he's never called Hyperman in this, but I
really like that you called him that. Actually, I think that's the way we should just go. I saw that name online somewhere. I think I don't know. I think it came from somewhere. I didn't make it even the way he's drawn. He's like, hello. Like at the end, it's like Hyperman.
Yeah. But he then, when he realizes what the true agenda of the quintessence is, he calls them out on it, and he lays out what he believes each of their motivation is, why they would want the destruction of Kansas to happen sooner. For example, with the wizard Shazam, if it happens, maybe Billy Batson doesn't have to sacrifice himself in Kingdom Come.
But see, that's all garbage, because the quintessence, I had always assumed, were all five powers of good. They were all versions of what God would be. if you didn't believe in the one true God. Here's all different ones. They're there to help. I'm like, this sucks. None of them are there to help. That's all selfish. So it just seemed odd to me.
Yeah. I mean, so it seems like that was probably maybe the biggest frustration with the quintessence. Did you buy their motivation? Like, because again, he lays out for each of them. Like, it makes enough sense, I guess, but
yeah, they made sense, but that still sucks. Like, again, it didn't jive with who those characters have been known to be over the previous issues we've read them. That's what annoyed me. It's like, no, like, I'm like, come on, what are we doing here? It seemed like we were making something happen.
Yeah. Once in the kingdom, the Kingdom Come Trinity and our Trinity interact, there are a lot of moments there where there are kind of, hints of the future that are uttered, and our characters don't know what to make of them, especially with the ultimate fate of Lois Lane and the parentage of the baby that they're all trying to rescue and all of that. I mean, I don't know what stood out to you the most, or you want to talk about?
Well, it kind of stood out to me where it was kind of ignored when it first came up. It's like, oh, Lois, and they're like, and like, they didn't even say anything. They just like turned away, like, yeah, so what do you think? And they just went on to the next panel. That was it was funny to see awkwardness in a comic book drawn that way, because it was not a good thing to say. They couldn't share that. They were like, I don't think they should have shared what had happened, because that could have changed a lot of stuff. Yeah.
And the final battle takes place at the planet Krypton restaurant, which of course, we had seen in Kingdom Come. And then so the one shots that come in between issues 1 and 2, most of them are set in the Kingdom Come era and feature the generational characters. But the last one, the Planet Krypton special, is set in the present day DCU, and I guess ties most directly into what we see in that final battle. This revelation that Rip Hunter dispatched these kids from Kingdom Come to essentially stock the planet Krypton and turn it from this memorabilia shrine into an actual arsenal with Phantom Zone projectors and all these other pieces of weaponry across the DC universe that our heroes can use against Gog in the final battle.
I am convinced that you and I could open up a planet Krypton, but I think it would need to be like a distillery. I think it would need to be like somehow a superhero themed brewery and spirits. I think that, and we can name all the cocktails after famous DC comic issues. Yeah, what could we? That'd be some great drink ideas, actually.
It's funny. Has Warner Brothers ever done a Planet Krypton anything? Because you would think even at Comic-Con, it's just kind of like a pop-up thing. Like,
that'd be awesome.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, we would like it. At least the two of us would enjoy it.
What I'm saying,
the subscribers of this podcast, we would all enjoy it.
But I'm just even if it were just at San Diego Comic-Con, they set up like a I feel like that's the place for it. I don't know.
That would be awesome. Yeah, I'm going to start thinking of. I'm going to start sending you cocktail names. Nice. We'll do that.
So we won't go through all those one shots. Obviously, I talked about the Offspring one. That to me was the most resonant. If you were going to read one of those one shots, or honestly, even The Kingdom itself, if you were like, I'm going to read one issue, read the Offspring one. It was really lovely. And we touched on the Planet Krypton one. There's the Son of the Bat. Yeah. So you have the son of Bruce and Talia. And he is romantically involved with Firestar, the daughter of Dick Grayson and Starfire. And she gets her own one-shot special as well. Yeah. And then there's a Kid Flash one as well with Iris West, daughter of Wally, who has just thrown himself into being the Flash and pays more mind to her brother Barry, who's the slacker and doesn't care. And she's off trying to get her father's attention as Kid Flash. That was cool because you get to see Mark Waid playing in the Flash world, always enjoyable. Right. The Son of the Bat one I thought was maybe the most intriguing of the one shots, in that the son of the Bat, I can't even say his name, Ibn. I'm probably mispronouncing it. Arabic name, but he recruits / resurrects Brainiac, Luthor, and Ra's al Ghul because he feels that Ra's al Ghul, his grandfather, because he feels that if anyone might be able to figure out a way to keep their world from blinking out of existence, it would be them. But of course, they have their own agenda because they're the villains. And but he's able to get the jump on Luthor and Brainiac, and ultimately kills Roz in that issue. So, but that one was intriguing. Just kind of the idea of trying to get these three ultimate villains to cooperate in any way, shape, or form.
No, it's kind of neat because it's really the first incarnation of what Damian would turn out to be.
Exactly. And even there, and I think it's just kind of like a throwaway line at one point, but they do establish that Bruce didn't know about him initially. So it is it's very much a precursor to Damian.
Yeah. Like somebody must have went back like, oh, this is cool. Nobody's ever flushed this out. So that's neat.
I guess the last piece with the Kingdom, because I know we want to get to the World's Finest arc, but with the Kingdom, this notion that we end on that, because at this point, right, so Kingdom Come initially Elseworlds, but now you have the Kingdom event and you have this crossover between them. And seemingly throughout the story, the idea that, oh, this is the future of the DC universe. But now with the revelation of Hypertime, it's like, well, no, that's not necessarily the case. They're different timelines. So the future that the Kingdom Come world has encountered is not necessarily the one that our characters will.
Yeah, it is interesting because World's Finest doesn't take place necessarily in theoretically continuity, but it's supposed to be still Earth 1.
I take it, but see, I know that is a good good question. I mean, it's set in the early days, right? So it's set in, but I do take it as, I do take that title as quote unquote canon as much as anything is these days. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. And that's the hard thing to deal with. Cause I think now that we're back, I think canon and continuity meant more when we were post Crisis to Infinite Crisis. Cause there was just one version. That was it. Like, and that was the point they were aiming for. But now that Hypertime is basically ultimately the new Elseworlds or Black Label or whatever you call it now, they had so many cool options. And even with World's Finest, like World's Finest really is, to me, if the rating was a little bit higher as far as language, it would be a Black Label title. It's not really in continuity unless they're going to say we're filling in the gaps of Earth when it's one stuff that we never heard about.
Right.
But you want to jump in? Because now we get to talk about Magog and where he came from.
Yeah. Well, kind of on this note though, of continuity, and I know now I'm really overthinking this, but it's like we've had so many crisis level events since the Kingdom.
Yeah.
Is it even in continuity? And if it can, it and the World's Finest story be in continuity? Because in World's Finest, you have younger versions of Batman and Superman meeting their Kingdom Come Earth 222 counterparts. But in the Kingdom, you have, older Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman from our Earth encountering them. And there's never anything in the World's Finest title to sort of reference the events of the Kingdom or anything. So I know I'm really overthinking this, but it's like, I don't know.
I will be honest, like as I was rereading the Return to Kingdom Come stuff, I had to stop a number of times and ask those questions. Like, wait, okay, which Earth? I know these guys are from Earth 22, but then which Earth are these folks from? Like that, I was playing that game quite a bit, and then I go, it doesn't matter, just keep reading. I think I just kept going.
But this arc, so you read this World's Finest arc as it was coming out.
I did, and it's funny, like. The more I'm reading, there are certain books that I have pulled that I feel read well individually. So a month from later, I'm like, oh yeah, okay. But I found that I really enjoyed this one reading all 5 back to back than when I'd read. I felt like I forgot some of the intricacies from month to month. And I don't always get the chance to reread the previous months before I read the second one.
Gotcha.
So,
yeah. I mean, I did not read this as it was coming out. I knew I would do an episode on it when the whole thing was done. So I just waited, and then I read it all 5 back to back earlier today. So I was really cutting it close on the homework. But
it's all good. That's what I did.
God, I loved it. It was so good.
Agreed.
And I know we've already sang the praises of Dan Mora, but the art was just incredible. And it was such a great payoff to Kingdom Come, but equally, if not more so, to that prior World's Finest arc that we talked about, where we met the young boy who will go on to become Magog, and again, we did an episode, we won't rehash it, but that the second arc of the World's Finest title, where you have this boy who escapes the destruction of his parallel Earth by traversing dimensions, ends up on our Earth, and essentially becomes Superman's previously unknown sidekick, Boy Thunder.
Right.
And ultimately and over the course of that arc, right, Superman is trying to show him the way, but he's prone to anger and to exerting excessive force towards the villain. So you definitely see there's this darkness there, and there really is a need to try to steer him toward the right path. But then ultimately in an altercation with the Key in the Fortress of Solitude near the ship that brought young David to this Earth, the ship is activated and his vibrational frequency changed, right? He's pulled away to an unknown Earth within the multiverse. But at the very last page of that arc, we see he's shown up on Earth 22, and who is there to greet him but Gog? I've been waiting for you. And we've been waiting since the end of that arc to follow that thread. And now we get it with this.
Which was also way back then. I remember reading that, and that's Gog, but then you start to ask yourself, wait a second, which Gog is this? Like, who? We've known a person named Gog before. Like, which one is this? And that's when I was like really happy to then hear more about this.
Yeah. Oh, and so now, actually, though, I'm glad you brought that up, because this makes sense. This was another big revelation. I don't know if this has been talked about before. Maybe it has, and I just missed it. But in that The Kingdom hardcover, you know what I'm talking about? Where they show the original pages to that New Year's Evil special.
Yeah.
It was originally supposed to be Gog. Or, God damn it, Magog. But but editorial changed their mind, and they wanted it to be a different character. So Jerry Ordway redrew the pages, and they show you them side by side. So I think I don't know. I look at the Gog we get in World's Finest, and the design is the same as what we got in Thy Kingdom Come. Yes. And so I think that's what was always probably intended for Gog. I think the reason why we ended up with the design of Gog in The Kingdom was because they had to make it a different character, but they couldn't make it wildly different. I think that's why. But it does create a little dissonance. But I think when you look at World's Finest, okay, that feels right.
Correct. I think as we're looking through this arc, it's really cool because very well written. You're learning little by little and more about who David is, who he will be, what we don't know, what the characters don't know about him, what we already know about him that we're waiting for them to figure out on their own. And then the end of the whole arc, there could be more. So I wonder if a few arcs away or in a different book, we are going to see older David clearly leading those Earth 22 heroes in a different generation. That would be cool. I would read that book.
I would have to imagine. We haven't seen the last of that Kingdom Come world.
Yeah.
The kind of the launching point for this arc. So this 5-issue arc, Return to Kingdom Come, or Heir to the Kingdom, it's kind of billed differently on the cover and the interior.
The interior, yeah.
I wanted to have their cake and eat it too. I think Heir to the Kingdom is probably
we'll see what the trade says when it comes out.
I'm almost positive it's Return to Kingdom Come, which is what we'll be calling this episode as well. Hopefully, in the algorithm, that'll pop a little bit more. Because, Bernie, now I'm expecting big numbers when you come on the show. After that Man of Steel episode,
I know. I'm sorry. I hope I can bring the heat. I hope I can keep on bringing the heat for people.
Sweet Bernie, man. We got those downloads. But we open on Barry, traveling the multiverse as he does, mapping it.
Which was so funny because that was not, you knew it was going to be in Kingdom Come, but that was not the first person I expected to see.
Agreed.
I was like, oh, and then you do the math. You're like, oh, wait, this is probably going to be the way that he is the one that finds out what's going on because he's able to vibrate through worlds.
I like how we get Barry's narration at the beginning, and he's talking about how he does this. He tells everyone he's doing this for the strategy, right? Because who knows where our next enemies or allies might come from. So we have to map the multiverse and see what else is out there. But he's like, but mostly I'm just curious to see what else, what's different on these other Earths.
He's going for a drive.
But he gets these glimpses of someone of course he recognizes as David, as Boy Thunder, and brings this to Batman and Superman. And sort of repurposes a cosmic treadmill normally used to travel through time and makes it so that they can use it to travel between Earths. Although it's highly, that is quite, I mean, he's upfront with them, full disclosure. He's like, I don't know what this is going to do, guys. But of course they go for it.
You might end up in a totally random universe, but we don't know. But I even liked how they arrived. That was also cool too, where they weren't fully there yet.
Yeah,
but they could see they could see what was happening. And they're at the whole scene at the graveyard. That's pretty rough.
Yeah, so it's like they end up on Earth 22, but Barry does warn them there might be some temporal hiccups initially. So they end up further in the timeline on Earth 22 after the events of Kingdom Come. And so they see an older David at a cemetery, and they see their older counterparts of Batman and Superman mourning. Initially, it seems to be 3 fallen fellow superheroes. And then, I mean, it's quite striking when you get that double page spread of the vast cemetery.
Yeah. And you could even read some of the names on the headstones too. It was interesting to see which ones they put. Like there are a lot of different timelines, like different eras of people. It's cool.
Yeah. So it was very effective because obviously we know what awaits the characters of Kingdom Come, but now this is kind of because it's for Batman and Superman, like they've been trying to find David, but their means are limited other than essentially Barry and whatever he might be able to come up with. So like they're trying to find David. That's been their mission. But now to kind of get this glimpse and Superman in particular really takes it hard and kind of like what kind of Superman would allow this to happen? What kind of hero could he be if this happens on his watch? Which creates some great tension throughout. Yeah.
It had this almost Arlington Cemetery kind of vibe, or even Normandy after World War II, that kind of process. Like it was something vast, and it really hit me hard. It's like, oh, okay, this is what it would look like if a real battle or explosion like that happened. We never saw the repercussions of that from Kingdom Come.
I know. I don't want to spoil too much of Thy Kingdom Come, but you do. I'll just say that you do get to see some glimpses into like the far future for the Earth 22 Superman, but it's not what you get here is a different spin on it, a different flavor, because you really get, I think, more specific and more of that immediate aftermath of it. So it definitely, that's the thing, because you come out of Kingdom Come and the characters have come out the other side. It feels like the world has. Superman and Wonder Woman are going to have a baby. There's definitely an optimistic note that it ends on, but this little sequence here is an important reminder of like, no, there is a huge loss and a cost for all of this.
Yeah. And then we shift. So then we shift the vibrations settle, and then they end up back near ultimately planet Krypton.
Yes.
And then they go into their like identity disguises and just kind of take a seat at the table and kind of do some observations at the restaurant.
Yeah. So that was a lot of fun. So like now they're earlier in the timeline, they're well before Joker attacking the Daily Planet and Superman retreating from humanity and all of that. So they're earlier than we've seen in this timeline.
Right. Magog doesn't exist yet.
He's Thunder Man at this point.
Yes. He's Thunder Man. Yes. Not Hyperman.
No. What I do want to say, especially when we're talking about Bruce and Clark and Planet Krypton and strategizing, one of the things that I really do love throughout this entire series and especially this arc, and we just did an episode on Superman and Batman's first meetings across time and media. So I've had World's Finest on the brain a lot.
Yeah.
And I really do love the way they work together, the trust, the partnership, the belief that they have in each other. There's a point later on where Batman says to Superman, like, I've seen you take on entire planets. Like, you can do this. And maybe not necessarily in this story, but certainly in others, I know Superman has expressed, something similar towards him along the lines of, being able to figure it out or come up with a plan. And it's like the level of trust and belief that they have in each other, I think goes such a long way towards each of them being able to do what they do and how important that is.
Well, and Batman is, when he's digging into David and like, hey, like snap out of it. And when he says like Superman doesn't lie, like just for Bruce to be able to like, hey, listen, this is what I know about this man. You can trust him. He's not going to steer you wrong. So don't act like he's trying to fool you. It was this rendition of Batman and Superman together is one of my favorites. And I know that you talked about this recently on the them first meeting. I think that what struck a lot of people, and we know that there have been instances where Superman and Batman have met in this kind of style. We walked through the Snyder characterizations and all that. I think that's what rubbed people wrong right off the bat, where we didn't really get a chance to see that, and that's what was hard. I would hope we would have sometime if that existed, but it exists so well in this World's Finest series that it's just a joy to read their little repartee, or even just sitting down and talking through things.
Yeah, I mean, look, with the like with the Snyder's Justice League, you have that scene of them at the end outside the farm, and it's like, I think it was like that little
You're
glimpse,
almost there.
But no,
Yeah.
I know, no, I love the dynamic here, and Bruce in particular, when he reins Clark in, when Clark's displaying kind of uncharacteristic level of anger over this, and he's like, you're not best when you're angry, and that's the thing, the extent to which they know each other, and this really my first true extended exposure to this dynamic was that Jeff Loeb Superman Batman series with the dueling narrations, and
it's excellent.
It's so, and like the way they know each other, like that really informs so much of the way I see these two and the way they work together. And obviously this is its own spin on it, but it still feels in keeping with that, like just in terms of how well they know one another. So yeah, throughout the story, that was fantastic. And yeah, of course they encounter Thunderman, and Superman is just over the moon, and David for a moment seems to be as well, but then attacks.
Right.
And then, I mean, we don't need to do a beat by beat plot recap, but essentially David lies to everyone and claims he doesn't know who they are, and that there are these murderers and imposters and they have to be taken out.
Right.
And we very early on see that he's doing the bidding of Gog. And one of the things that I think was very surprising was Superman and Batman of Kingdom Come kneeling down before Gog.
Which you would not think you're going to see, especially Superman.
Yeah.
And that harkened back to some other ways. And again, we've heard on recent episodes, just we don't love the evil Superman. We don't love the weak Superman. We love the Superman that's strong and full of hope and ready to go. But I really did appreciate that scene where you realize David was full of it, and he's talking to God. He's like, I do know them. They are good, man. Like they tried, but he was putting all his faith in God, that he had allegiance now to worship God.
And that's why I really love the balance that this story struck, because for David in particular, it shows like this is just like a lost, misguided kid ultimately, right? He was trying to find his way. He's not evil at his core. And similarly with Batman and Superman, obviously you knew it couldn't be that they just bought into God, right? That would never be the case. But then it becomes a question of, was he just like outright mind controlling them, or is it more of a subtle influence? And according to Gog, it's ultimately the latter. Like it's kind of this influence he's exerting over them, but he's not full on puppeteering them, which I liked, because at least that still gave them some agency and they were able to break free.
Well, it's interesting because you see the history of where Gog comes from and how it was a warring planet. And then he was the only basically being that was left from that planet in space, almost like a fiery ember. And then ultimately the remains of his planet became what we know of to be Apocalypse and New Genesis, which was like, ooh, that's quite a stretch for Mr. Waid to now, like, he's like creating like, hey, sorry, Mr. Kirby, but this is where it came from.
Yeah, that's a good question as far as how well that would line up with, I don't know, whatever's been established about the origins of the fourth world or the third world before. But the idea of Gog being of the third world, like when you read that Kingdom Come, it lines up in that sense, at least, as far as I remember.
But I enjoyed all of that, because I felt, again, like you and I, we like backstory. Like you can't just say this and not share the where it came from and why. And I really did appreciate that. And then as we see Gog, it's almost, he's very two-faced, because he's telling the heroes and even David that, like, you will have eternal life through this. I'm doing this for you. ultimately he's doing it for him. Like he wants to be able to see everything and then share this through all of Hypertime. And that's where it gets a little. That's when Superman realizes, like, oh no, that's a boom tube, and then he realizes what's going to happen next.
I think the backstory and the true motivation of Gog, I thought all of that was interesting and was a good payoff, because it's like, what is this guy really about? I don't mean to keep going back to that Justice Society story, but it's similar. Thematically, there's a lot that lines up, even though the specifics play out differently, because in that story, this god-like being Gog emerges and is essentially granting wishes. And it causes the splintering within the Justice Society team, where some fall in line because he seems to be doing wonderful things. But then you get to a point in the story, I won't spoil it, but it's just like, well, he wants something, right? Yeah. And once that moment happens, it's like, oh, okay, like this is what this has all been about, and then it goes from there. So similarly here, like you said, like he's promising this grand ascension to everyone and eternal life, and it's like, all right, what is this really about? Okay. And so with the backstory, so he comes from the third world, Urgrund, I think is what it's called.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Which, just as a side note, so my 4-year-old son, I don't know where this came from, but a lot of times it'd be like baby Ungrun. And I know that's not Urgrund, but it was close enough that I read it. I'm like, wait, where are you getting this from? Like, do you have some knowledge of the third world? Like, what is this? But
it was an odd name, but I appreciated, like, okay, we're going to really go deep. We're going to go way back as where he came from, which is good.
Yeah. And so essentially there was this planet that he's from that was engulfed in this war between two major realms. And he was the sole holdout. He was the one who was preaching order, right? And putting down the sword essentially, and was cast out for it. And the rest of his planet died, and that birthed the fourth world and New Genesis and Apocalypse in particular. But this whole business about, for his people, the only way to reach Valhalla, right, and your eternal reward, your paradise, is to die in noble battle.
Right.
And he didn't. He refused to fight, and he was cast out. And like you said, ultimately ends up on Earth, and then Metron shows up, and they become buddies, and Metron's like, oh, hey, here's the map of the multiverse. It's like, what a boner. Why would you tell him that?
It was so interesting, too, because we usually have seen Metron as this very stoic, knowledgeable, wise, sitting in the chair, almost condescending because he knows everything. But then to see him like cowering and like very weak and freaked out in the corner, like that's like, oh, okay, this is messed up stuff is going on. And then to find the only way that Gog is going to get into Valhalla is he's going to send all of the heroes off to fight Apocalypse and die basically in war-like suicide, so that he can then take the glory and go to Valhalla. And it's like, whoa, everybody step back a second. What's going on?
Yeah. And I the story really pinned a lot on, it's like super hard to get to Apocalypse.
Yes. When we're like, I think if you have Mother Box.
I know, it's like all these stories, they're there all the time. But
maybe Earth 22 doesn't have Mother Boxes.
Well, I mean, because I think the way it's described, it's like there's the I feel like Apocalypse and New Genesis are described in this as even being like outside the like they're
outside
in their
of
own,
the Hypertime,
something like that. I don't know, but in any event, it's very difficult to get there. It's not just a matter of boom tubing.
Mr. Waid, could you please write in the comments, where is this newly birthed Apocalypse and New Genesis actually located?
Where is it on the map? This is what I need to know. You put it
on the map. Is it on the back of the map? Is it in the top of the map?
Honestly, part of me wants to actually just get the map and frame it and hang it up ironically.
No, I swear to you. Oh, God. Or a bumper sticker. It'll go across your bumper. That's great.
But I do love when the fact that the Kingdom Come Batman and Superman are able to, Batman in particular is able to, those detective instincts never go away, and he's suspicious enough, and he bugs our Bruce, and they were able to hear the entire conversation that Superman and Batman have with Metron, who lays out everything that we just talked about. And that's enough to snap Superman and Batman out of it. And then we get this quartet teaming up.
It's awesome. And then we have the Supermans fighting against Gog. And then the Batmans are trying to get David back and help all that. It's pretty awesome. It was a good fifth issue.
Yeah, and we alluded to this, but more than alluded to it before. But this reveal, this was genuinely surprising. Like, oh, this is really cool. The idea that,
Yeah.
well, how is Gog able to exert this control over everyone?
Right.
And the revelation that he has at least part of the anti-life equation.
Well, and again, the idea that which is interesting, because as knowledgeable as Gog is and all knowing that he is, to not know that that's the one freaking thing that Darkseid has been looking for this whole time. And if you go to Apocalypse, he's going to end you, because he knows that that he will stop at nothing to take that from you.
Yeah.
And that's awesome.
I know, it was genuinely surprising. And what was cool too about it was that would we have thought twice if it was just like, oh, Gog just has that power, he can exert control. You'd be like, oh, all right, like, sure.
No. But it's the what it can do. I love that. It's like, wait a second, it does this and this and this, and it's when he starts bringing up Apocalypse and going, and it's like, oh, that's the connection now.
Exactly. So our crew, including David, who's finally at least come around, and we skipped over this part, but at an earlier point in the story, Gog now transforms him from Thunderman into Magog. So he's now taken on this form that we will come to know him as later in Kingdom Come. But all of them now working together are able to knock Gog down and prevent him from entering the boom tube and going to Apocalypse. But
correct.
Again, Darkseid now has sensed the anti-life equation, and he's here. And this was a great, just the visuals and the dialogue. I mean, just this take on Darkseid, it was so cool.
And just dark, like you see Wonder Woman, and it looked like Darkseid offed Wonder Woman and Green Lantern. That looked like he killed them both.
I know. I had the same thought. I'm like, are they dead? I mean,
like her eyes go white, Green Lantern's bloody in the rocks. I was like, oh, I think he just killed him. And even how he split his Omega beams, I think he took out 2 Supermen at the same time.
Yeah, they're just strong. Like, they're just able to withstand them. But
which is, again, that's very confusing. But okay, we'll let that go.
Well, yeah, we'll go with that. Yeah, that's fine. They're strong enough; they can take it. But and then David's been instructed to bring in reinforcements, right? Because other heroes are coming. Like, Batman's whole thing is like, well, we can stop Darkseid from getting Gog. We could try to move Gog. We could stop Darkseid. But David hides, which we've seen him do before. So Correct. It's very in keeping with his character in that Strange Visitor arc when there were
before the mine, all the people that trapped. Yep.
Exactly. And when we even got the flashback to his world before it was destroyed, people who were begging for help and he just kept running. So there's this cowardice.
Well, and you see that there's been, it's hard. I wouldn't always say cowardice, but more of like this boy-like, because he's never really had the chance to be parented or grow up. He's just grown physically and then been still allowed to be a boy, essentially. But it was interesting. Even the way Dan Mora drew him, like after he takes out and like basically roasts and kills Gog, he's like, wait, we can celebrate. It's time to celebrate. Let's go. And then everybody's like, no, bro, that was not okay. And then he's like, you can see him go from like, yay to, oh no. He's like, no, it's okay. No, I took care of it. It's fine. And they're like, you murdered. You killed him in cold blood. And it got pretty hard pretty fast.
Yeah. And I think like with any good story, it's compelling because you can see it from both perspectives. Clearly from our hero side, it's like, well, no, we don't do that, especially when there is another way. And Batman like explicitly articulated another path that they could have taken.
You're waiting for all of the heroes. Remember, you said they were coming. You could have waited. He goes, and I saw you. You were ducking behind there. He calls him out on it.
Yeah. But for David, what he perceived to be this opportunity in an impossible situation against Darkseid, obviously he feels like he did the right thing. Although at the same time, he has spent enough time with Batman and Superman. It's like, did you think this was going to play with them? Like, really?
Yeah. Well, what I love though, if you think about in issue 5 of this, we really see. So David is dealing with the fact that now he's been rejected by Superman and Batman going, hey, like you murdered somebody. This is not okay. And it's everybody. It's all of them. So, but then from there, he's gone. And then he's going to then go down the story arc that Kingdom Come happens, which that's when Clark loses it. And he goes, we gotta tell them. We gotta tell them. It's like, no, you can't share. And then the Spectre comes into play. And that to me was like some of the best pages of the entire thing, because you see Mark finally goes, boop, and now we connect the stories. And it was so awesome.
The Spectre, going back to the art, looked so good.
So good.
So good. And
and the coloring changed. The coloring changed. Everything behind it changed. Oh, so good.
Yeah, and you see the Spectre lay out events to our Batman and Superman that, again, line up with our understanding of that Kingdom Come timeline and what Magog will go on to do in the future.
Yeah, and he says you can't share with them what's going to happen. They're going. This is going to play out. It may not play out exactly, but it's going to play out. But then, of course, what I love is then the ability to talk to old David.
Yeah, they stop in that future time of Earth 22, right. where they landed originally.
Before they're able to go back, which we're not going to get into the timey-wimey hyper stuff, but Mark can write whatever the hell he wants. So he just said, hey, we're going to do a quick stop off before we go back into our own Earth. And the fact that they're able to build into him one last time and say, hey, like, you can't live in those choices and in those past mistakes. What are you going to do now? And then we see that great splash of him in like a new Magog outfit, but as a hero with all the heroes, and he's older with a beard, and he's going to lead them into a new era, which is like, yes, thank you. That's great.
I know for as much of a note of hope we left Kingdom Come with, there's still the Magog piece, there's still more. And you get that here. And I love our Superman, the understanding that he's able to achieve through the vision of the future and the conversation with Batman, right? Who says to him, it's like, it is Batman who says to him, it's not that this Superman wouldn't save these people. He thought he wasn't needed, but the world, every world needs a Superman.
Needs a Superman. Yeah.
And what I love too is I like the way this paid off, because in that final discussion with David, where David's like, well, what do you want from me? Like, what, like, you're trying to lock me up? Like, what do you want from me? He's like, Clark's like, I don't know. But now when he has this moment before they go back to their Earth, he's able to impart to him exactly what you just said. I thought it was great. And we've hit on this so many times before, and this comes up a lot, especially with the work of Jeff Johns, when we're talking about Infinite Crisis and Doomsday Clock, like just the importance of Superman, right? It's obviously important to DC from a publishing perspective, but like within this fictional universe, the role that he plays, his importance to each of these worlds and these timelines. I love that they had that moment. It was so good.
I've never heard anybody, I mean, I've listened to a lot of stuff too, just like you, but I've never heard anybody besides you use the phrase, the Superman of it all. And I've caught myself say that a lot to myself, or even in conversation with others, like you got to think about the Superman of it all. And it's got a very, very important ring to it, because even in a large character story, and maybe if Superman is not in the whole story, he affects what heroes think, and he affects the DC universe as a whole. So even though maybe it's a Batman book, there is still the Superman of it all inside of it, because Batman is living in Superman's world.
Yes. Yeah. No, very much so. Yeah. I mean, that's the arc. I mean, I don't know. What else haven't we talked about that you wanted to?
I'm good, man. I enjoyed it. And I think it was a great way. If they're going to do something else with older David, older Magog, great. If they leave it, I feel like there's great closure, and it's kind of nice to now have that trilogy. It's like that Kingdom is like that middle child that needed to happen to get us to then this Return to Kingdom Come.
Yeah, I feel the same. If this is the end of the road for the world of Kingdom Come, I do feel satisfied. I mean, Magog's backstory never kept me up at night, like wondering what it was. But now that we got it was great. Cool. And that Strange Visitor arc, it was even before that final issue when he shows up on Earth 22 and you see Gog, but the penultimate issue in that arc, the last page where young David is fighting Joker and he's like, I'll kill you. I don't care if it takes me 20 years. And then you get that flash of
Yeah.
him as Magog, and it's like, oh my God, like this is how it connects.
Yeah.
So it's the backstory that maybe you didn't know you needed, but then you got it, and it's like, oh, this is great, and it fills in these gaps.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, like I said, just kind of my love for the world of Kingdom Come has grown immensely. I do think there is definitely potential, and I also feel like I know it's a common complaint, right? Like, oh, there's so many Batman books, and it's like, well, there are, and so part of me is like, if you have an opportunity, right, to tell a story still using these characters, but in a different time or on a different Earth or whatever, where you can really, play around more, it seems like there's potential there. So I don't know. Time will tell. I mean, I have to imagine Mark's got some other ideas for down the line and World's Finest. I could be totally wrong, but it feels like we've had now like every other arc we've had the Kingdom Come tie-in. Like I wonder if that'll be
Yeah. Now I'm going to leave you with one thing that I'm just curious about, and I would the listeners put a comment in what you think about this. We've experienced many creators that return to material, sometimes as a continuity or like, hey, let's do more. Sometimes as an apology. So if you think about it in this way, do we, now that we have Return to Kingdom Come, do you even need to read the Kingdom?
No, I don't think you do.
No. So I was wondering about it too. Now, like it used to be just Kingdom Come and the Kingdom, and that's all we had. It's like, oh, okay. Well, there's an ending there. But now that we have Return to Kingdom Come, you notice you don't really need. It's almost like Superman 1, Superman 2. We did 3 and 4. But Superman Returns kind of goes, So I wonder if Mark at a certain point went, I'm not done with this. I got to fix a few things maybe. So I wonder, Mark, if you're listening, let us know. You don't have to say it's apology, but I'm sure it's I wanted to do more. Here's why.
Yeah, I get that. And no, I mean, I think if you were, I don't know, like if I were putting together a World of Kingdom Come reading order for people, the thing is, I really got a lot more out of the Kingdom now than I did before, but I don't know, particularly if it were a new reader. I don't know. I'd probably say go from Kingdom Come to these World's Finest stories. And if you're really curious, do the Justice Society stuff. It's probably kind of where I would land. That's a good question.
It exists kind of like, you know how you watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, Last Crusade. Just go to Dial of Destiny.
I genuinely think and that's the last thing I'll say about the Hypertime, but I feel like if Hypertime had really taken off at the time, like late 90s into the 2000s, like if that had really become a thing, then I feel like it'd be first appearance of Hypertime. Like this would have been a big thing. And I have to imagine everyone involved at the time probably, because it is, I mean, that's the big reveal at the end of it. It's like, this is Hypertime. And I actually did have one last thing. But now that I've read so many of these Silver Age stories in particular that I know, Mark Waid loves, seeing like the Superman Red, Superman Blue from the Silver Age, like seeing that as one of the images there. Yeah. Like that has so much more meaning to me now than it did as a kid, where I was like, what the hell is all this?
Yeah. What is this?
But yeah, I think if this had if Hypertime had become a thing, I think that there probably would have been more said and done with the Kingdom at the time. But I think it just didn't have the impact that was probably intended.
And it is really cool that DC did figure out a way through various evolutions into now have 52 universes again to say like Earth 22 is a Kingdom Come universe, and to make that a thing to then allow a doorway to be open to have more stuff coming out of it, which is, I think that's really cool.
Totally. Well, listen, I thank you very much for rereading and coming along here. This was a lot of fun as always. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. No worries, man. Thanks.
That concludes our Return to Kingdom Come, but the show's not over yet. Right after this break, I'll be joined by Superman homepage contributor Mark Lax as we discuss the pre-crisis deaths of Superman. Stay tuned. I'm a proud backer of the Paragons of Earth comic book project, now available to support on Kickstarter. The creative team of Percival Constantine, Thomas DJ, and Eric Johns have plucked forgotten Golden Age superheroes from the public domain, reinvented them as their own sort of Justice League, and put them up against a Lovecraftian apocalypse. Back this project and learn more by going to percivalconstantine.com/paragons. Also, Perry, a multiple-time guest on Digging for Kryptonite, hosts the Superhero Cinephiles podcast about comic book-inspired films. Be sure to listen wherever you get podcasts.
Are you a die-hard Marvel zombie who compulsively rewatches every movie and TV show you can get your hands on from the House of Ideas?
Or are you a new or lapsed Marvel fan looking for an excuse to finally catch up on what your buddies have been going on and on and on about for as long as you've known them?
Then folks, do we have the show for you?
Head over to the Pop Break Today podcast feed on all your favorite platforms to check out myself, Bill Bodkin, and my co-host, Alex Marcus, on Bill vs. the MCU, where we review every single installment of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Along with a journey around the Marvel multiverses, where we check in on MCU-adjacent content like Netflix's The Defender Saga, Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Fox's X-Men franchise, and so much more.
New episodes premiere the second Tuesday of every month on thepopbreak.com and the Pop Break Today podcast feed.
This episode made possible in part by educator, hobby comic book collector, and pop culture enthusiast Sam Lim. Sam is based in the South Jersey area and is looking to connect with other comics fans as well as retailers. They're also looking for comic shops to explore, so recommendations are welcome. Be sure to follow Sam on Instagram at SZLComics to see their latest comic pickups and shop adventures. Joining me to discuss the many pre-crisis deaths of Superman is Superman homepage contributor Mark Lax. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Anthony.
I'm calling this the many pre-crisis deaths of Superman, and we have about half a dozen pre-crisis stories from the comics that we looked at that we'll discuss. But we really do have to put deaths in quotes.
Yes, absolutely.
Because of these, again, half a dozen or so stories that we looked at, there's one where Superman full on dies, though that's an imaginary story. We have a couple of stories where he gets really, really, really close to death, but doesn't actually die. But I think the stories are interesting because you get to see how he is contending with that and also to see some of the reactions from the people around him. And then we have a few stories where there are no signs of life. So I think from a clinical medical definition, he's dead, but he is very quickly revived. Whatever it is that's happened to him in these stories is very quickly reversed. So it's certainly nothing to the extent of the 1992 Death of Superman story. But I thought these would be interesting to take a look at.
Oh, yeah. They were, Silver Age and Bronze Age. So you never know what to expect with those stories. Certainly, I mean, the imaginary story to me is really one of the best imaginary stories, or one of the best Silver Age stories, I think, that came out of that era. It was written by Jerry Siegel, so you can't get much better than that. And it really gives you a sense of. I know we went through the 1992 Death of Superman, but at that time, I mean, this really gave you the sense of finality. I mean, Superman was dead. That was it, And it checked off all the boxes. Who killed him? Luthor. How did he kill him? With kryptonite. I mean, that whole thing that checked off all the boxes. And it just, it could also be used as the kind of story you would think could be used as the last Superman story. The way it's played out, of course, you would hope the last Superman story is not about his actual death. What did you think about that?
So we're referring to Superman number 149 from 1961, like you said, written by Jerry Siegel, co-creator of the character, drawn by Kurt Swan, and it's called The Death of Superman. It was collected in the Superman at 75 Years hardcover collection a while back. And we've touched on it before, specifically when we did our Silver Age episode a while back. Where I land on it is I think it's a great, great, great Lex Luthor story. And reading it from Lex's perspective, I think it's very satisfying because he gets what he wants, but then ultimately has to pay a price for it. And over the course of the story, he discovers this element Z and is able to cure cancer and is ultimately paroled and seems to have turned over this new leaf and befriends Superman. Superman even goes so far as to give him a signal watch because all of his former underworld cronies are coming after him and putting pressure on him to take out Superman. So much so that eventually Superman builds him this outer space base for him to conduct all of his experiments to benefit mankind. And it's really kind of amazing to see all of that transpire between the two characters. But then, because it's Lex, it's all a ruse. And Lex lures Superman into this satellite and bombards him with kryptonite radiation and kills him in front of Lois and Perry and Jimmy, who he's brought in as an audience. So from a Lex point of view, I like it a lot, but I'll be honest, I really don't particularly care for it as a Superman story. And this was billed as an imaginary story from the jump and throughout the story. And that's why I think it ends with such a note of finality. Superman doesn't come back. He dies. Supergirl takes his place, carrying on his heroic work, and apprehends Lex, and Lex is tried in Kandor. And this was, I think, one of the most interesting parts of the story, where he tries to make a deal with them. He's this great scientific mind. For years now, they've wanted the city to be enlarged and restored. He promises he can do that, and they turn him down. They're not willing to deal with him after what he's done, and so he's banished to the Phantom Zone.
Right.
So again, from Lex's point of view, I thought it was interesting, but just the notion of this is how Superman goes out. He's just duped and killed, and that's it. I don't know.
Yeah. Again, we go back to the Silver Age. It could be, we're so used to these big stories where Superman, we're used to the 1992 death of Superman. And we're used to this, these big, huge stories. So having this little story where Superman is just kind of, where Lex Luthor just kind of tricks him. Yeah, you would think Superman would be a little bit smarter than that. But, it worked. I just think it's a lot stronger a story than say, just from Luthor's perspective. That's how I feel about it. Is it one of the best Superman stories ever written? Of course not. But it's still a fun story, and it's a very emotional story, so especially when he's in his casket and all the heroes and all the people from all the different planets come and visit, and I just feel again, I understand when you say it's more a Lex Luthor story, but I just feel it's still a pretty strong story.
No, fair enough. I think ultimately it comes down to it breaks my heart to see the character go out like that. What's interesting too is that you are expecting a reveal, some kind of turn as the story progresses, that Superman wasn't actually dead. He had just mimicked death. He had put himself into a trance, like that Super Friends episode from the mid-'80s, The Death of Superman. Right. Like, you're kind of expecting that, and you don't get that. And actually, to the story's credit, it ends up becoming surprising that there's not that reversal, that it really does have that air of finality to it. And it does tap into, I think whenever we talk about the death of Superman, the most interesting part, and certainly what I found to be the case with the 90s storyline, is the reactions, how the world deals with this. And so to have the funeral, to have the world in mourning, I think it taps into that core idea. So no, there's a lot about this that I do like, but again, I don't know if I'll ever come all the way over to the other side of loving this from the Superman perspective of it all, but it's definitely an interesting story. And for anyone who's never read it, I really do recommend reading it. And it also has, it's funny, one of the things I was going to ask you is, of these stories we looked at, they're written by multiple creative teams across titles, across decades. So they were never meant to be read together the way we are now. But I was thinking about, what, if any, commonalities, any themes, any patterns emerge as you look at these stories? And I think for me, what stands out is that in virtually all of these instances, it's some form of kryptonite or magic that takes out Superman, which of course makes all the sense in the world. Those are his two main weaknesses. Right. And then just the imagery, particularly when it's a kryptonite related death, of the green skin in that clear casket. We see that in a number of instances. So I feel like just that imagery of the green skin and the clear casket, and again, kryptonite or magic, those are the things that I think are the common denominators in these stories, right? Is there anything else that really stood out to you?
Well, I think another thing would be Supergirl taking his place. In many of the stories, he either tells her, "You're going to be the one taking my place," or obviously in the imaginary story, she does take his place. That, and there's a lot of, especially the one where he gets the leprosy, which I think is a pretty good story, for its time. I think it's a pretty good story where there's so much, thinking back and, of all the things that, all the things he encountered, all the people and all the, the people he loved in Smallville.
Yeah, that Virus X story was interesting. So that's from Action Comics 363 through 366 from 1968 by Leo Dorfman and Ross Andrew. Now, this was when Action was split between Superman and Supergirl, so each part is only half the issue. So essentially, it's the equivalent of 2 full single issues. Mm-hmm. But it is very interesting. So Lex creates a version of Virus X on Earth by exposing these microbes to kryptonite. And then there's all this business about smuggling the virus out of the prison using this. What was the name again? Vento or Ventro? Is a ventriloquist?
Yeah, Vento. He's this ventriloquist who I'm trying to think. I guess Superman caught his brother.
I think that was the backstory. And then he put Clark under his spell in the previous issue. Yeah.
Right. So and Lex, they give him. The prison gives him the run of the lab, and someone says, Warden, is this really a good idea? Sure, it's a good idea. I mean, he's not going to do anything here. He's going to help mankind. And of course, he creates this virus. And they have the ventriloquist comes and they have this big riot. And Luthor throws a boot or a shoe at him. And of course, in the shoe is the vial of the virus. And the way Clark accidentally gets it on him because he's thinking, he's like hypnotized now, I believe, right? And
yes.
he's thinking he's going to kill Superman in his identity, in his secret identity, and he goes to his own apartment, not really realizing it's his apartment. Okay, I'll buy that, and starts to spread it on the bed. So, when he comes home in his alter ego, he's going to catch it. And of course, it gets on his hand, and he gets it. And I believe he snaps out of it at that point.
Yes, but that's then when the disease overtakes him, and yes, it's this Kryptonian leprosy. And this had been teased before in another issue, The Last Days of Superman, where he thought he was dying from Virus X, but it ended up just being kryptonite poisoning throughout the issue because Jimmy had a shard of it in his camera, and every time Jimmy got close to him, that's when he felt the effects. And that's a great issue. We talked about that in another episode, but it's just kind of funny how he's like, oh man, I'm feeling better. I must be getting this surge of strength before I die. But no, it's just because Jimmy and the kryptonite were gone. But anyway, in this story, yes, it's the actual Virus X created by Lex, and it's quite a grisly image when you see the skin turn. It's very Killer Croc-esque, like very green, scaly skin.
I was going to say it's very reptilian.
Yes.
It's very reptilian. And when he goes back, or when they think back to Krypton, when it first came out and how, people got it, years and years and years before he was even born. And it shows the kids becoming, this green reptilian type of, it's a little gruesome in that way. And, they're just trying to kind of punch you in the face with it, saying how bad this is and how, awful this is. And the whole thing, of course, Luthor has to take credit for it. Now he's already in jail. So I guess I don't know what else they can do to him. But I overall, I mean, it's a good story. There's a lot of him thinking back to how Krypton exploded and he landed in Smallville and he was adopted by the Kents and blah blah. And it just goes through all the, leading up to this story, which I think most people reading the book at the time would know all of this. But I guess for whatever reason they felt they had to add in, all his thoughts. But no, I mean, and the way Supergirl brings Lori Lamaris, of course, the mermaid, his first love or second love, I guess. Lana would be his first. Lori, Lois, and Lana in this big
bubble
dome
sphere,
sphere, and just to say goodbye, and she's holding it up, and they're all sniffing and sobbing. And now, when you read it, it's amusing.
Yeah, I kept waiting for that to be a vision or a mirage, a hallucination that he's having as he nears death. But no, they were actually there being carried by Supergirl. But no, I have to say, out of everything we read, this 4-parter, I probably enjoyed the most. And maybe not surprisingly, because you had more real estate, more time to spend with this particular story. And to your point, I liked even though it's information we already knew as the audience, I did like that issue where Superman is reliving his life, because this is what he's thinking about as the end approaches. So I like that journey down memory lane that he took. I also really liked the world's reaction. And I thought it was interesting the way it played out, because sort of the man on the street reactions, people are afraid of him when he appears in this form and he's suffering from the leprosy and nobody wants to catch it. And so there's a lot of fear from the man on the street, the people on the ground. But then you have that whole business with the United Nations, and they bring in every country brings in their top doctor to try to save him. And I liked that. And it made all the sense in the world. It's like, of course, after everything Superman has done for mankind. So the fact that there was this effort to try to rally around him and try to save him, even though it ultimately proved not to be possible, I really, really like. And I also like too, Supergirl's, I think it was Supergirl's idea, right? To put him in the Phantom Zone. But then all the other Phantom Zone inmates, they use their collective mind force to keep him out.
Yeah, that's something that happened so often in the Silver Age. I don't think that ever happened again. But yeah, they use their mind for some kind, to keep him out. And it just takes a little accident, I guess, by flying towards, good thing he, flew towards Bizarro World, that they threw the white kryptonite at him, and that's what saved him. And then of course, once he's cured and all that, he realizes he's in the Flambron, I guess, and they're helping him and all of that, and he's like, oh, of course, the white kryptonite. And then what happens is he now heads back to Earth, and he's so proud and happy, and he goes there, and all of a sudden there's all these things that say Superman did this and Superman did that, and Superman came back and he was cured. And he's like, what are you talking about? He hears, they're calling out to Superman to come, and he's so confused. He's saying, I just got back. Who's this other Superman? He tries to catch him. And they give you these little clues how he's saving a temple in what was the Mayan temple or something, I think. And he's saving it from a volcano, and Superman tries to stay very far from the volcano, from the fire. And he's like, well, Superman, he shouldn't be afraid of that. And then they go underwater, and Superman, swims away really quick. And so we then, of course, find out that the Justice League has been masquerading as Superman this whole time. And of course, when he was in the water, it was Aquaman. When they were by the fire, it's Martian Manhunter, whose fire is his enemy. So I thought, on the one hand, I thought that was kind of clever. On the other hand, it still didn't quite make sense. Like, for instance, if Green Lantern was using his ring, wouldn't you see the green, or wouldn't you?
Yeah, probably a little bit of a stretch. But yes, they're ultimately doing that because the Kandorians are going to select a replacement from the Bottle City to come out and take Superman's place. But they need time to go through this contest, the selection process. So in the meantime, yes, you have the Justice Leaguers stepping in as these temporary replacements. I think what was most interesting to me about this was Superman's reaction when he gets back to Earth. And there is a little bit of, I don't know if maybe we go so far as to say hubris, but when he flies past all the flags and he's like, hey, those should be at half mast. And he sees the Superman costume in the window display, half price. and there's just sort of this sense of like, hey, what's going on here? Again, then all of the pieces fall into place as you laid out. So it quickly becomes clear. The one lingering question I have, though, is that one of the things Superman saw when he got back was this poster of Superman endorsing a political candidate. And there was never any follow-up on that. I'm like, which of the Justice Leaguers who standing in for him for like a day decided to make this political endorsement on Superman's behalf?
And they all know that's not something Superman would do.
Right.
So why would they do that? And he's like, oh, I know this guy and he's a good guy, but I don't endorse candidates. But it's just so funny. You're right. Which one of them would do that? I mean, they all know Superman wouldn't really do that. So, it's just one of the things they put in just to kind of make you go, what's this all about?
Yeah. Now, one of the other stories you mentioned that actually came a couple of years before this was Superman number 188 from 1966, the School for Superman Assassins. You have this planet where you have all of these assassins training to kill Superman and practicing on this android Superman. And eventually Zuniel. I don't know if that's our pronunciation that we're going with.
Zuniel, the murderer or something like that. Is that what he's called?
Yeah. So he makes it to the top of the class, essentially with this way of broadcasting kryptonite radiation as radio waves. And it works on the android, and he comes to Earth. And first he tries it on who he thinks is Superman, but is actually an actor making an appearance as Superman in a promotion for an upcoming stage play. So I thought that was funny. Mm-hmm. And then eventually, though, he does. There are a few. The battle kind of has a few different beats to it, but then ultimately it goes to the radio tower in Metropolis and just beams this kryptonite radiation throughout the city so that Superman can't hide from it. And it does take him down to the point where when they bring him back and they run all of these tests, there are no signs of life. So again, from a clinical perspective, it seems he has met his end. Then as the story unfolds, there are the peace vigilantes on this planet, and they're appalled at the idea that these assassins have killed the champion of another world. So they intervene, and that Superman android is activated and then is able to essentially reverse the process, I guess, absorb the kryptonite radiation from Superman.
I have no clue what he does, but he does something that saves him. Like I said in these stories, there's always that one little thing towards the end that, is so easy to bring him back. But so that saves Superman.
Yeah. But that was, like we said, that Superman 149, which came earliest in all of the issues that we looked at, was an imaginary story. So Superman 188 is the first instance, seemingly, of the character actually perishing for however brief a period of time it is. So that then takes us to the last couple on our list, which now bring us into the realm of magic. So one of them is World's Finest 207 from 1971 by Len Wein and Dick Dillon, and then Justice League of America number 145 from 1977 by Steve Englehart and Dick Dillon. Now, I know you didn't get a chance to read the Justice League one, right?
No, I did not.
So that was an interesting one. There you have an adversary named Count Crystal who makes a deal with the demon Asgore to receive power in exchange for killing each member of the Justice League. And so Count Crystal just materializes in the satellite and little magic whammy and kills Superman. It's a very quick kill. And then we follow the rest of the Leaguers, of course, as they battle Count Crystal. But Superman's spirit now is in the underworld and essentially would be consumed by this demon Asgore. But because he's Superman, he's able to fight back. So you see that spiritual battle in this other realm. And he's able to resist Asgore at least for long enough until the Phantom Stranger is able to intervene. And by the end of the story, Asgore turns on Count Crystal and takes his soul. And while that door is open to bring Count Crystal down, that's how Phantom Stranger is able to get Superman's spirit back into his body. So that's an instance where, he is killed, and then you follow his spirit on this journey into the next phase as he's battling this demon and holding his own and resisting until he's able to get this rescue. So it was a solid one. The audience knows the magic stories are not my favorite. They never have been, but it was intriguing enough. I enjoyed that one.
I don't mind the magic element. I don't think it's something that should be used a lot.
I hear. So on that note, how did you feel about World's Finest 207? This was a story called A Matter of Light and Death involving Dr. Light, who is this part I thought was clever, where he's able to identify the kind of the light energy that magic gives off, and he's able to tap into that, and he uses the Satan staff. But how did you feel about that story? Here's
the thing. It's, it starts off with, they're in some old used gym that's been closed for a long time, and all these creeps or thugs are there, and there's a guy in the shadow who wants to kill Superman. And how are we going to kill Superman? And then it turns out it's Clark Kent, and he's got he tells him how he's going to do it, magic and all that. And this is another brainwash, another
we talk about patterns.
Right.
That's another thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Another where he's been hypnotized. We find out it was Dr. Light. And it's just, and he says, they say, we'll prove it to us. He goes, well, I'll disappear. And of course, she flies off real quick, and that's how he disappears. And then he goes and he finds the staff and he brings it to them. And when they I guess, use it on Superman, and they kind of put him in amber.
Yeah, well, they bring to life, there are these drawings of these ancient Kryptonian creatures, right, that are part of this upcoming exhibit. And they use the staff to bring it to life. And it's this leech essentially that sucks the life, literally sucks the life out of him. And then, yes, they preserve him in amber and they bring him back to the hideout, and Batman's there and he's been wrapped up. He's able to free himself. And when he gets hold of the staff, is able to, because of course he's Batman, he's able to figure out how to reprogram it to reverse the process. And Superman is revived.
It was a fun story, but it shows how, and again, we always go back to the death of Superman in 1992, how that was such a big event. I mean, they announced they're going to kill Superman, and it just became one of the biggest comic book stories of all time. And here in these issues, Superman dies and he comes back, and and it's not like they ever mention it in the papers. And in this issue of Justice League, Superman's gonna die, and it was just a device they used just because you're saying to yourself, they're going to kill Superman. Well, how are they going to bring him back? And then of course, 20 pages later, they bring him back.
Look, I've talked a lot on the show about the 1992 storyline, how formative it was for me. And we spent a lot of time looking at subsequent tellings of Superman's death, adaptations of the death of Superman, some far more literal and faithful, others much more of a loose adaptation. And then other instances, not adaptations, but other instances of Superman or a version of Superman dying, like in Infinite Crisis or like in The Kingdom or so on. But again, I was just kind of curious to take a look at these instances before the 1992 storyline. And it's not a contest. And I know that these stories that we're talking about here, they were not meant to be the event that 1992 storyline was. Totally get that. But I will say, and I take this as a positive, I come away from this reading with even more appreciation for what those Triangle era creators did in the 90s, because the choice to make Superman's killer Doomsday this force of nature who appears out of nowhere, it's not kryptonite, it's not magic, it's not one of the usual suspects, it's not Lex getting the drop on him and tricking him. It's this force of nature that comes out of nowhere. And they got so much mileage out of it, not just the death itself, but everything that followed. So again, fascinating to look at what maybe could be considered building blocks to what we would ultimately get. But yeah, I just came away from it just with a renewed appreciation for what that 90s storyline did, because we've seen other instances where these stories touch on some of the ideas, but nothing gets even close to what we would get later. But it was really fascinating to take a look at these, and I appreciate you coming along for this ride. Is there anything else you want to say before we sign off?
I appreciate you having me on and, rereading these stories for the first time in a long time.
This podcast is made possible by the support of our Patreon community. Sign up for a monthly or annual membership at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato and choose from a range of rewards. This week, I want to spotlight our Kryptonian Science Council tier, where you can be the guest for an episode of Your Superman Fan Journey. As an alternative to signing up for this tier, you can buy a one-time ticket in my digital store. Thank you to all patrons for your support. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Many of you have already used this code, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you. Be sure to read Mark's comic book reviews at supermanhomepage.com and catch him on the homepage's YouTube live shows. My thanks once again to Mark and Bernie for joining me. Thank you, as always, for listening. Make sure you come back next week for another all-new episode. And until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Another Exciting Episode in the Adventures of Superman, an episode-by-episode breakdown of the classic George Reeves television show, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.